Forget America. White America is an irredeemably racist country, and that the only course for the Negroes is to bring about a final, violent, apocalyptic confrontation of black and white.
The right to democracy has long been denied to the citizens of Detroit through a corporate voting system. A gentrification is a form of ethnic cleansing, American style. I will also be exploring the unspoken ethnic component behind Detroit gentrification. Next, Real Detroit TV will be focusing on the serious economic upheavals affecting those living in what are deemed historically, economically depressed neighborhoods that have been deliberately denied resources, but steeped with intrinsically valuable homes that have once again been found appealing. In 2009, 40,000 absentee votes were too poorly secured to be recounted, and thousands of written-in ballots appeared to be in the same handwriting in 2013. Real investigations into these incidents have never taken place, which explains why Detroit does not reflect the people who live here. Real Detroit TV will be doing a deep dive to compile a crime and investigative anthology series examining the corporate financial oligarchy that implemented the wholesale privatization of an entire U.S. city and the effects it has on the residents. Real Detroit TV will examine and expose the full backing of a federal court acting on behalf of a powerful corporate and financial interest, a cabal of capitalists, politicians, and legal and financial bagmen that have looted virtually all of Detroit's basic public infrastructure.
He's one of the biggest private landlords in Detroit, picking up cheap homes at the tax auction and finding families to fill them.
But the horrible condition of some of those homes has the attention of the 7 investigators. And tonight, our own Ross Jones digs into the company the tenants say is preying on defenseless Detroiters.
Latricia Hill spent years searching for a home where she and her family could feel comfortable. And on this quiet street in Detroit, she thought she finally found it.
Everybody get their own space. First time in life. So we were excited about it.
She was able to afford the home through Section 8 housing, a federal program that helps low-income families pay their rent. And for $1,100 a month, Latricia and her family lived here near 8 Mile in Wyoming. For the mother of 4, the home was a dream fulfilled.
When was the first problem?
The first day that I moved in.
Until she lived in it.
Water starts spewing out of the floor. The power would go out all the time. We have a really, really, really bad spider issue in this house.
Everything that could go wrong did. And even though she wasn't paying for it, Latricia said the home still found a way to cost her plenty.
I was crying maybe a week in and begging them to please take this house back.
The company responsible for the home is Detroit Property Exchange. Its owner, Michael Kelly, is one of the city's biggest private landlords. In lawsuits, his tenants say he makes a living by cutting corners, cycling Detroiters into his vast inventory of dilapidated homes, often failing to properly fix them up. Melissa Oceani, one of Kelly's employees, saw it firsthand.
Everything we had done in that house, we had done so quickly and so cheaply that you touch it and it falls apart.
Melissa worked for Detroit Property Exchange as a maintenance manager. The company's business model, she says, is simple. Pick up dilapidated homes at the county tax auction, put little, if any, money into them, and find a tenant desperate enough to sign on the dotted line.
All they have to do is make it look good, put a little paint over here, a little caulking over here, and pass inspection.
In Latricia's case, Detroit Property Exchange still got paid, even though the problems weren't being fixed. That was until she complained to the Detroit Housing Commission, who inspected the property twice and concluded it wasn't up to code. Now, unless the property is fixed by the end of the month, she and her 4 children need to be out or risk losing their Section 8 voucher.
To think you can throw that tiny little bit of money at something and get so much back in return on the backs of other people.
They're creating large amounts of instability. And that's the greatest damage that they do.
Joshua Akers is an assistant professor at U of M Dearborn who studied speculators like Michael Kelly and the role they've played in the city's housing crisis.
Low-income residents are left with a series of bad choices. They're often looking for housing that is held by people who are intentionally withholding repairs, that are intentionally trying to just extract rents and milk properties.
Detroit Property Exchange picked up this home on Manor Street for $1,000 in 2015 after Dorothy King lost it to foreclosure. They offered to rent it back to her for $500 a month. Now a tenant, Dorothy says she kept making monthly payments even in the months the home had no hot water, the basement flooded, and holes in the roof grew larger. Repairs came slowly, she says, if they came at all.
I feel like they're using somebody.
Are they using you?
Yeah. They get my rent money and won't fix up nothing.
And on the same street, just a few houses down, we found a different home managed by Detroit Property Exchange, but the same story. Holes in walls everywhere, the ceiling in several rooms collapsing. But Darlene Spells couldn't afford to move elsewhere and didn't want to leave her family nearby. Out of fear she might be evicted if she complained, she kept making payments.
I didn't want to get in no trouble where they could put me out. I didn't know the ins and the outs of the system, so I never did nothing.
As the home fell into further disrepair, Darlene says Detroit Property Exchange came to her, saying they'd sell her the house for $1. But it wasn't out of goodwill, says Melissa Oceani, but out of liability. Now the money Darlene would have paid in rent can go towards fixing the problems that were never addressed.
Mr. Kelly, good morning.
We tried repeatedly to speak with Michael Kelly through both text and phone calls. He never responded. Through a lawyer, he declined an interview. We caught up with him last week as he was walking into work.
How do you respond to those who say you are profiting off of the backs of poor Detroiters?
We provide home ownership to a lot of people.
Homes that don't have heat, that have holes in the roof? Are those homes?
Kelly cut short our interview, but in an email, his attorney would tell us, while it is our goal that every customer enjoy their experience with our company, that is not always the case, adding that unexpected and persisting property maintenance issues are a reality in this business. As for Melissa, she left the Detroit Property Exchange in September, ashamed, she said, of her role in a company that put profit over people.
Just because it's legal does not mean that it's okay to do. It just means that you got away with it, and that's what has to stop.
Well, Michael Kelly is currently the subject of a class action lawsuit claiming he lures vulnerable Detroiters into predatory contracts. But because of all the properties he owns, has Kelly become too big to fail? Tonight on 7 Action News at 11, why did the city dismiss more than 800 blight tickets linked to Kelly's properties and more than $1 million in back taxes, penalties, and fees? That's part 2 of our investigation tonight on 7 Action News at 11.
Well, can't wait to see that because I thought the mayor was putting an end to practices like this and Detroiters.
Well, they started doing inspections last year for rental properties, but there's a lot of rental properties on a lot of zip codes, and they can't get to all of them. And indeed, the ones they haven't gotten to are able to remain in this kind of shape. And boy, we saw some unbelievable properties.
Which is the pictures you show there.
Right, and people are living in them. We'll look forward to the report at 11. Ross, thank you.
Taxes takes a new turn, and now those behind the lawsuit are hoping to help those who faced foreclosure while also holding the city accountable. Consumer investigator Hank Winchester is live tonight. Hank, we're talking about millions of dollars here.
Yeah, we are, Kimberly, a huge dollar amount. Here's a copy of that federal class action lawsuit. As you mentioned, the plaintiffs not only going after the city of Detroit, but they also named Mayor Mike Duggan.
This is a copy of the lawsuit getting lots of attention. Both the city and Mayor Duggan named in the suit. The allegation that the city was late delivering more than 250,000 property tax notices, and that may have raised the tax bill for thousands. Those I spoke with today are not happy.
I don't like that. I'm paying high prices of taxes on my building. Yeah. High prices. I'm saying I'm still trying to catch up with the rent, the taxes right now.
Yeah. What do you think about them trying to go after the city to recoup some of that money?
I love it. I love it.
The city denying any wrongdoing, and in a statement tonight to Help Me Hank said, the city complied with the law and we will prevail in court. The lawsuit names a number of victims who claim they lost their homes because of the inflated numbers. And last week during a hearing about the ongoing property tax battle, emotions were running high.
People have lost their homes that have been over-assessed.
Back out here live, I reached out to attorneys representing some of the victims named in this class action lawsuit. They say the goal really is to make sure that what happened never happens again. As you heard, the mayor's team saying tonight that the mayor and the administration, they've worked diligently since Duggan became mayor to make sure that this tax issue was not a problem. We're live here tonight in Corktown. Hank Winchester, back to you.
You know, Hank, I've been hearing a lot of people talk about this story. Some people claim it's a problem that's gone on for years and years and affected quite a number of homeowners. Do you have any idea how many they think are affected?
Well, in the lawsuit, they're talking about possibly up to 80% of homeowners in Detroit, and they also point out that they think the majority of those affected are lower income people throughout the city. That is one of the problems here that's named in the lawsuit itself. Back to you.
Incredible. Okay, Hank, keep us posted.
Detroit is now 80% African American, and 40% of Detroit's residents live below the federal poverty level. But as downtown Detroit becomes increasingly gentrified, thousands of Detroit's longtime residents, mostly African-American families, have lost their homes to foreclosure for property taxes they should not have been paying in the first place because the poverty tax exemption excuses those in poverty from paying. Well, for more, we go to Detroit, Michigan, where we're joined by Democratic Congress member Rashida Tlaib of Michigan, who's worked on this lawsuit from before the time she entered Congress. And we're joined by Bernadette Atuahene, a professor at Chicago-Kent College of Law and research professor at the American Bar Foundation, member of the Coalition for Property Tax Justice. She's most recent study is titled Predatory Cities, forthcoming in the UC Berkeley Law Review later this month. We welcome you both to Democracy Now! Congressmember Tlaib, you went back to Detroit for this major news conference. Talk about why this is so critical in your town, in your city of Detroit.
You know, I represent the third poorest congressional district in the country out of 435 congressional seats in the nation. And the human impact of what it feels like to not be offered the same equal rights that the majority of other Michiganders were getting. I mean, the due process of being able to get notice, to be able to have the right to appeal, but also the right to have your home assessed every year as required by not only the city charter, but the Michigan State Constitution. So many of my residents, before I ever got elected, were coming to the Sugar Law Center for Economic and Social Justice saying, something's not right here. I don't know. Why did I get this after the deadline? What is happening here? And when we filed the FOIA, we found out 260,000 Detroiters received the notice either late or even past the deadline. And it was devastating. The fact that they didn't even get the right to appeal it. And what we hear from the city administration and those folks that are in power to make the change is, well, it's their fault. They didn't do anything about it, but you didn't give them the option to do anything about it. So that's why I'm really commending the coalition and what we call the Detroit's professor over here, Bernadette, for pushing forward and speaking truth. I think that's what's been really hard. You heard from a mother recently of 7 children, and she felt like she did something wrong. And when she finally felt, you know, heard the data, heard that she was actually cheated out of her home. It felt liberating in some sense that she wasn't the one that was in the wrong. She shouldn't feel ashamed. The city of Detroit and those in power should feel ashamed.
And Congresswoman, I'd like to ask you in terms of the how this crisis is affecting not just Detroit, but across the nation, in terms of the wealth of especially of African Americans and Latinos because of the seizures of their homes and especially resulting from after 2008 mortgage meltdown, when so many other people went underwater.
Yeah, and that's one of the key things is, you know, homes are economic stability. But many folks, just the historic nature, not only from Chicago to other really beautifully historic cities, majority black cities, what you know is these are homes that the families have been in there generations, generations after generations. You could probably go back, and I remember I was telling Bernadette this, there was this woman who was born in her home, senior citizen in her 70s, and loses her home for less than $1,000. I mean, it's devastating to see something so ripped away from you. But yes, economic stability is so tied to home ownership. And the fact of the matter is, it's not only what happened here with this tax foreclosure crisis and, you know, I think illegal taking, is that we also see that big banks, mortgage industry, others, there are still institutional systemic racism within their processes. We see it with settlement cases all across the country over and over again. I remember specifically in Financial Services Committee, hearing about a whistleblower within Wells Fargo that was saying that he was taught and trained that if somebody came in with an accent to give a higher interest rate. So our communities of color all across the United States are facing barriers after barriers and these structural kind of racist approaches and processes. To me, what happened to many of my Detroit neighbors and not being offered due process and getting their homes taken away from them was completely wrong. The devastating part of it too was after I got into the United States Congress, when I found out millions of dollars that was sent to Detroit to to address the blight, to address this housing crisis. When I found out that Detroit was ready, and I already had known this, Detroit was responsible for much of that. So the federal government is trying to fix an issue that was created by the own city administration is wrong. Look, it's in the charter. It's the law of the land in the city. You're supposed to assess people's homes, walking away from your responsibility and your duty, saying that, oh, everybody got notice, but you gave them notice after the deadline that they could actually appeal. It's simply wrong. And I think if you ask anybody across this country, the access to fairness and due process is so key. And that's why I think the class action suit is important. Not only do we have to fight in the streets to tell the truth and tell our stories, also onto the House floor of Congress or many other local governments, but also through the courts. Do we have to demand that we're treated with respect and dignity, to take people's homes away from them, where their children lives, their neighborhood, everything is ripped from them, all because somebody decided they didn't deserve it. They didn't deserve the process or equality and due process that everybody else gets around the state.
Professor Bernadette Atuahene, you teach at Illinois Institute of Technology at the law school there. You've done deep research into the racial wealth gap. If you can talk about the facts and figures behind this lawsuit, what it has meant, and how the Detroit mayor is currently responding to the class action suit and dealing with this illegal seizure of tax money or throwing people out of their homes.
Yeah, thank you, Amy. So the first thing I want people to know is in Detroit, we have 1 in 4 homes that have gone through property tax foreclosure. 1 in 4. We haven't seen this number of property tax foreclosures in American history since the Great Depression. So the real question is, what is going on? And so I've done research that shows that between 2009 and 2015, anywhere in each of those 7 years, anywhere between 55 and 85% of properties were being assessed in violation of the Michigan State Constitution, which clearly says no property is to be assessed at more than 50% of its market value. And then when we looked at which houses were being overassessed, we found that 95% or more of the lowest valued homes were being overassessed, while the highest valued homes were actually being underassessed. And so the next study we did is because anytime you do research in Detroit and you don't deal with race directly, you're doing everyone a disservice. So the next study we did is we looked at Wayne County, and we looked at all the municipalities of Wayne County, and there's 3 that have a supermajority of African Americans, 70% or more: Detroit, Inkster, and Highland Park. And each of those majority black cities were being subjected to these unconstitutional tax assessments and foreclosures at a greater rate than the majority white cities. The third and final study we did looked at the relationship between these unconstitutional tax assessments and foreclosure rates. Because in fact, there's lots of things that can cause foreclosure, right? Poverty, a death in the family, etc. And so we needed to hold all of those variables constant to really isolate the effect of this one variable of unconstitutional tax assessments on foreclosure rates. And we're able to say that 10% of these historic rates of tax foreclosure in Detroit would not have happened but for these unconstitutional property tax assessments. That's 10% of all foreclosures. And when you look at just the kind of lowest valued homes, we're able to say 1 in 4 or 25% of those foreclosures would not have happened but for these unconstitutional property tax assessments. The city and the mayor in specific, their response to this overwhelming empirical evidence of illegality is to say, you know, if you thought you were being overassessed, you should have in fact filed an appeal, right? So moving the blame, the onus from the city to do the property tax assessments correctly to homeowners to, saying they should have appealed. But what this lawsuit is all about as Representative Tlaib has so clearly pointed out, is about the fact that the city did not even give people a chance to appeal. Why? Because in 2017, they mailed the property tax assessment notices late. And so they mailed them, in fact, late after the appeal deadline, meaning that Detroiters did not have an opportunity to appeal these illegally inflated property taxes. And that is the heart of this particular lawsuit. It is a due process lawsuit. Again, just fighting on behalf of Detroiters who are being overassessed and not given an opportunity to fight back.
And Professor, I wanted to ask you, obviously the super high assessments meant that those homeowners, especially in the poorest communities, were being required to pay more property taxes, right? Now, we're in a situation now, obviously Detroit was in financial crisis for many years, and now all of these reports about how Detroit is coming back. What is the real story now as to how Detroit is coming back?
That's right. And let's just put this in context. Detroit has the highest property tax rate in the state of Michigan. It has the second highest tax rate in the United States. On top of these already high tax rates, they're being illegally assessed, meaning on top of the highest tax rates in the country, they are now being taxed even more, right? And so that's the starting point. And when you, what was the question again?
Well, they keep saying Detroit's coming back, Bernadette.
Oh, yes.
And one of the things you should know is if you go to my neighborhoods, they don't think they're not coming back from whatever the heck their folks are saying they're coming back from. Poverty among children has actually increased in the city of Detroit. You see neighborhood after neighborhood that's been left behind. When they say come back, they're talking about the 7.2 miles. Yes. If you look at the census tracts, some of the wealthiest census tracts within the city of Detroit. They're talking about billionaires Dan Gilbert and the Illich family who continue to take tax giveaways from our school aid fund while literally down the street for their hockey stadium, for their for-profit development, while down the street, we have schools that don't have clean drinking water. We have schools that literally are closing down, these neighborhood schools that have been part of our anchors within our neighborhoods. So it is hard because I've actually had a senior citizen tell me, Detroit's coming back from where? You know, and why are they continually talking about only the downtown area and the surrounding kind of areas there? It's like an island, because anything beyond that island is real, true poverty, and people from those that can't afford their water bills, that literally one day their water gets shut off, the next day their children are being taken away from them. I mean, because they're saying, oh, they're negligent, but this is the same amount of money they're using for the for-profit industry that's even there for foster care. They won't even use it to help a woman get her water put back on. I mean, the hardship that we see our families facing, these are working class families. And even the young, the mother of 7, Sonia, she was saying that we're the ones out there in the restaurants that you don't look up and look at. We're the ones that are among you and your neighbors that have been part of the city of Detroit for so long. But they feel very truly left behind. Not only with what's going on with property taxes, but what's going on, the devastation of our water shutoffs, the devastation of what's happened to our education system and so forth, the disinvestment in our neighborhoods that are surrounding downtown Detroit is extremely put such a tremendous hardship on so many of our families.
And we at the Coalition for Property Tax Justice like to think of the comeback story as a tale of two cities.
Yes.
Right? Because you have downtown Detroit. In downtown Detroit, the developers there are getting tax subsidies and tax breaks, when in the neighborhoods, they're being unconstitutionally assessed and foreclosed on at historic rates. Yeah. So when you think about Detroit coming back, again, as Representative Tlaib said, it's about a comeback for 7 square miles that includes downtown. When you look at the rest of Detroit, the majority of Detroit, and let's get real, Black Detroit, there is no comeback.
That's right.
So, Congressmember Rashida Tlaib, I wanted to ask you about a related issue, and this is at the presidential campaign level. Democratic presidential candidate Michael Bloomberg facing criticism over this recently resurfaced video clip that shows him blaming the 2008 mortgage and financial crisis on the elimination of the long-standing racist lending policy known as redlining. This is Georgetown University President John DeGioia speaking to Bloomberg in 2008.
You've made some reference to the elements that led to where we are today. Could you go a little bit deeper and tell us from your perspective, how did we get here? What are the root causes of the crisis that
you can go back. I would say it probably all started back when there was a lot of pressure on banks to make loans to everyone. Redlining, if you remember, was the term where banks took whole neighborhoods and said, people in these neighborhoods are poor, they're not going to be able to pay off their mortgages, tell them your salesmen don't go into those areas. And then Congress got involved, as local elected officials as well, and said, oh, that's not fair, these people should be able to get credit. And once you started pushing in that direction, banks started making more and more loans where the credit of the person buying the house wasn't as good as you would like.
So that was Mayor Bloomberg 12 years ago. Congressmember Tlaib, if you can respond.
Look, you know, I think of many of the folks that I serve with in Congress. Many of them are millionaires. They're completely disconnected with the American people. Even when the federal shutdown happened, you had literally colleagues on both sides. You know, I don't get it. Why are they in the food bank line? Why are the federal employees can't go and apply for a loan? There's just really disconnect to understand the American people live check by check. But also there's a disconnect that government's supposed to be about people, right? Our public tax dollars are supposed to be used to create economic stability, to increase home ownership, to create these programs that I think are win-win for everyone. Instead, you know, you have folks with a different kind of very narrow lens that see things through a different perspective than those that are on the ground. The majority of Americans do not live within that little bubble of the 1% and those that have. And so I think people like me are running for office finally, and we're winning because we are folks that are dealing. You know, I lived very, very humble backgrounds. I mean, I'm the eldest of 14, a child of immigrants. Both my parents, my dad only had 4th grade education, my mother 8th grade, and just kind of building it up and working very extremely hard for that. But it's really, it's sad when people that are in leadership positions don't understand that even if they don't get it, they have to surround themselves with people that understand what it means to live in poverty in America, what it means to go sleep hungry, what it means to live near corporate pollution, and what that means to your public health. It means so many things of various broken systems. And Amy, you know this. If I open the curtain and look behind that of all the broken system, from mass incarceration to what's happening in our immigration system, how dehumanizing it's becoming and caging children, to what's happening to our healthcare system, to our education system. It's become all for profit. People are making money off of the pain of our oppression. And that is something that I continue to speak truth to. So no matter who's running for office, I will demand that they talk about the P word, which is poverty. I will demand that they talk about the structural problems and issues and challenges, real structural problems that lead to people's oppression in our country. Well, and we have to continue to think beyond the same old recycled folks running for office. They had their chance. They did not change people's lives for the better. Then we have to move on. They didn't do the job to fix the structural problems that I feel like in some ways get left behind. They like Band-Aids. Band-Aids, the rain falls, it slips off, it doesn't work. We need real structural change so that when somebody walks in the door, they are offered an equal access to opportunities that get easily accessible to those that have. And so I continue, Amy, to push back against these kinds of narratives. And, you know, I want folks that are listening to know this. Just because somebody is a billionaire or millionaire does not mean they know what's best interest of the American people. It's those that actually have suffered along with them, that understand that suffering, that understand that oppression themselves. We need to hear more from them. We need those individuals to start running for office because I truly believe those are the ones that people are waiting for.
Rashida Tlaib, we're going to ask you to stay with us just for another few minutes because we want to ask you about this major moment this past week when the Palestinian president Mahmoud Abbas came to the UN Security Council responding to President Trump's so-called Middle East peace plan. You're the first Palestinian-American congresswoman. But I want to thank you, Bernadette Tuahene, professor of Chicago Kent College of Law at Illinois Institute of Technology and research professor at the American Bar Foundation, member of the Coalition for Property Tax Justice.
As Governor of the State of Michigan, I do hereby officially request the immediate deployment of federal troops into Michigan to assist state and local authorities in reestablishing law and order in the city of Detroit. I am joined in this request by Jerome P. Kavanaugh, Mayor of the city of Detroit.
Pillage,
looting, murder, and arson have nothing to do with civil rights.
You're going to sit in front of your television set and listen to LBJ tell you that violence never accomplishes anything, my fellow Americans. But you see, the real problem with violence is that we have never been violent. We have been too nonviolent.
There's no such thing as a nonviolent revolution. The only kind of revolution that's nonviolent is the Negro Revolution. The only revolution based on loving your enemy is the Negro Revolution. That's no revolution. A revolution is bloody. Revolution is hostile. Revolution knows no compromise. Revolution overturns and destroys everything that gets in its way. And you sitting around here like a knot on the wall saying I'm going to love these folks no matter how much they hate me.
You call us savages and beasts and mad dogs running the street burning and looting, but we're doing this not for the destruction of the world, but we're trying to prove one point. We want freedom and justice and equality. We want to be treated equal. The best thing to do is give us freedom or at this place a riot with blood.
Here in Detroit, a city of war.